Welcome into the News4Jags podcast. I'm Jamal Saints here alongside Justin Barney. Justin, the Jaguars have been so quiet during the offseason. The most noise we've heard from the team this offseason has been the sound of Trevor Lawrence's first pitch at the Jumbo Shrimp game hitting the catcher's mitt. That's about it.
I loved it. And he threw 50 Cent out to dry, too, in the process. It was great to see that from Trevor. Jumbo Shrimp season is here. Trevor, good to be a part of it. Awesome to see him kind of engage with the fans like that.
Yeah, no, it was funny. He said that was his first Jumbo Shrimp game. It was a really good first pitch. I mean, it was a little high, but that's all right. He had some heat on it. He threw it from the mound. It got across the plate. We're good. So definitely he does throw things for a living, so maybe the bar is a little bit higher for him than a guy like 50 Cent or something. But that's all right. So after Trevor threw out that pitch, we did get a chance to talk with him a little bit. He told us that he's already got a chance to throw some passes with Calvin Ridley, but he's really excited for what the future will bring for Evan Ingram, and he hopes that it's more than just this single year on the franchise tag.
That was a big, priority for us this offseason, and so to have him back at least for this year and hopefully longer moving forward, I mean that's ideal. And just you saw kind of what he did to our offense this last season and how he came on towards the end of the year, and I think we've really figured out how to use him the right way, and I think he's helped us a ton, and we've maximized what he can do, and just to keep building on that. There's still more out there for him. That's the exciting part is you look at his numbers, and they were great, and they were some of the best numbers for Jacksonville tight ends ever, and for him, but I feel like he really didn't even catch on until the last back half of the season. So to look at having a full year of that, it's really exciting, and sky's the limit, and just for our offense too.
Yeah, Trevor kind of nails it on that, though. Evan Ingram did kind of catch fire late in the season, so if he could do that and sustain it through a full year, those numbers would be really nice, right?
And I think that kind of segues into draft conversation. I think you have to plan for a future even beyond Evan Ingram. 1-year deal right now with the franchise tag, no long-term extension. But Evan really, he came on from a week about 7 onward. He was just such a big part of that offense. And that is just something that they've lacked. It tells you everything you need to know about that Jaguars tight end position. Historically has been bad. And Evan Ingram set the franchise set the franchise record, set all the way back. It feels like at the turn of the century by Kyle Brady. And you want to keep that going. And I think it will. I think the year 2 of Evan Ingram, I think year 2 of Trevor and that Doug Peterson offense is going to be sensational. I do think they need some more help at tight end in the draft.
Yeah, and it's just a question of the kind of player you get, because it's tough to say, all right, well, I'm going to invest in a player that's exactly like Evan Ingram, who will eventually be his replacement, because then the two of them can't play together. So now you've kind of got a copy-paste kind of player, which is what some of the players that are at tight end that would be in that range for that first-round pick are. Very similar play styles. It would be tough for the two of them to coexist, which is fine if you just see a guy who needs to be brought along slowly as a rookie, I guess. Yeah.
You look at their arrangements last year at tight end. Evan Ingram and Chris Manhertz were the yin and yang in a sense, because you had the blocking of Manhertz. Although, trivia question, caught Trevor Lawrence's first NFL touchdown. Would have not picked that one in Vegas. But you got Luke Farrell there too. Not a guy who's gonna light it up from a score. May get 3 or 4 receptions a year kind of guy. But again, you talk about copy and paste. Do you go with like a Dalton Kincaid, a pass catcher in the draft, or do you go with a more complete tight end, a Michael Mayer, or you just blow it up and you go a Washington from Georgia, Darnell Washington?
You just really wanted to mention Michael Mayer. If you've been listening to the News4Jags podcast, he is all aboard the draft Michael Mayer train.
I'm aboard the Michael Mayer train.
I am completely off of it. So we're polar opposites here when it comes to Michael Mayer. That's the only reason the all-around tight end, Michael Mayer.
We've talked about the tight end position. Again, it's a position that needs to be addressed whether in free agency, they haven't done that free agency, or the draft. And I expect if not a first-round pick on there, I expect a day 2 pick on tight end. I think you really need to address that position. Again, we've talked about this on the podcast before. You have to be, if you're Trent Baalke, Doug Peterson, thinking a step or 2 ahead. If Evan Ingram doesn't have that big season, doesn't build off the franchise tag kind of season, if you don't see that performance out of Evan Ingram, he's going to price himself out of Jacksonville.
Sure.
And you need a guy to kind of replace that. And it's never bad to draft and develop a player. And I think in a position like that, Doug Peterson tight ends have historically been overutilized or utilized exceptionally well in Philadelphia. So I think you have to draft and develop that tight end. I don't know if that's Darnell Washington, Dalton Kincaid, Michael Mayer. What do you do at that position in the draft? Again, I think it has to be addressed somewhat early. Free agency's been a little bit of blah this year, a little bit of blah, but we knew that going in.
Hey, Sam Laporta will be there late in the draft. You know, Iowa has a pretty good history with tight ends. Just saying, he could probably play pretty well. And he's not a first-round pick like Michael Mayer.
That's true. Hey, but Michael Mayer, all the mocks I'm seeing, Michael Mayer is in that first round. The recent Todd McShay ESPN draft had the Jaguars passing on Michael Mayer. And Michael Mayer going to the Cowboys a few picks later.
Look at that.
They did. Michael Mayer, wasn't picked by the Jags, but Dalton Kincaid was in Todd McShay's more recent draft. And again, that's an Evan Ingram type of copy and paste player. He's more of that receiving tight end and not that blocking tight end like a Darnell Washington would be in terms of he's more of a Chris Manhertz with an Evan Ingram, a side of Evan Ingram. The Washington.
Washington's like he ate Chris Manhertz and Evan Ingram and grew to be a giant. No, I like Dalton Kincaid. I don't have a problem with that pick, but like Dalton Kincaid, I think can be a very impactful pro. He's a good pass catcher. The problem comes into play of how could you coexist? Like, how does that improve your team now? Because you say, all right, well, we have Evan Ingram, and we're paying Evan Ingram, so we're going to play Evan Ingram, but we just spent a first-round pick on a guy that's very similar to Evan Ingram. The ability to put the two of them on the field together is going to be few and far between because neither one of them is like an abnormally big guy. Neither one of them is what you would call an above-average blocker for the position.
Right.
I'm not even sure if Dalton Kincaid right now is an average blocker for the position. So you can't put the two of them out. Like you can't roll them out there in a two tight end set and say, all right, the defense has to respect that we could run the ball. The defense is like, I wish you would run the ball, please.
Exactly.
So that's the problem where I come into play when you start throwing guys like Dalton Kincaid. I like Dalton Kincaid as a player. I don't know that the fit's there.
Yeah, that makes sense. And again, that's
but that's short term. That's short.
To me, if you get a Dalton Kincaid there, you're not expecting Evan Ingram in your long-term plans because those players are very, very similar. And I don't know if you draft a Dalton Kincaid and pair him with an Evan Ingram because, again, the chances for those two guys to be on the field together at the same time, unless you're just thinking longer term, 2 or 3 years out with Dalton Kincaid being here, a more economical option than Evan Ingram. So, again, I think that's up for consideration. I do think tight end is a heavy emphasis in this draft.
And this is a very good tight end draft, so it makes sense to do that because you should be able to get a player. I like a lot of the tight ends. I don't like Michael Mayer. And don't get me wrong. I don't not like Michael Mayer. I like Michael Mayer, just not as a first-round pick.
Right.
I think his ceiling is lower, but he has an extremely high floor. He is a single kind of player, and the Jaguars still need to at least swing for a double. Kincaid could be a double. Only thing I don't like about Kincaid is being like a redshirt year kind of guy.
Right.
He's already 23, so then you're 24 before you get him on the field. As opposed, you can go with some of these other guys that are going to come into the league at 20, 21.
Yeah.
And if they have to redshirt a little bit later on in the draft, then you still get them in their prime, as opposed he's kind of starting already to get there.
Makes sense. I hear that argument there. And, my thinking has changed a little bit in terms of what the Jaguars are going to do with that first-round pick in free agency.
You off Michael Mayer?
Not totally off Michael Mayer, but I think a lot of people have said, you look at mock draft season and a lot of those picks have tilted towards offensive line in that with that first round. I mean, people make the assumption Jawan Taylor's gone, you need a right tackle. I don't think that. Walker Little to me is the natural guy at that right tackle position. And some of the recent stopgap position signees, Jacksonville has signed a couple guys in free agency in the past few days. Let's see, Josh Wells, offensive tackle, former Jaguar, who's done well. He's coming off an injury from the Bucs, and then Chandler Brewer, another offensive, kind of another stopgap guy, but again, a guy who could be a swing tackle kind of guy. So you're adding depth on that offensive line. Maybe a day 2 pick, day 3 for sure, offensive line invest in that. But, maybe in day 2 on a guard, Osiris Torrance, possibly. I just don't think tackle is that primary target in that first round, like some people have leaned towards, because I think you've got Cam Robinson coming off an injury, but he's paid like a big-time left tackle.
And he should be ready to go.
Yeah, and Walker Little, a second-round pick, who is
ascending player,
who is, again, got his snaps and played well for Cam Robinson last year. He's been kind of a swing tackle guy. So those two guys, I think you're set right there. So sure. I do think that, for people mocking all these tackles to the Jaguars, I just don't get that.
Here's my place where I'm torn, and I can't be the only one that feels this way. You got Trevor Lawrence here, right? And you have this young, fantastic quarterback, and the goal is to put as much talent around him as possible. Mm-hmm. But the Jaguars have missed so badly over the years on building their defense. They constantly are putting their resources, first-round picks, into improving that defensive unit. You saw last year, 2 first-round picks into improving the defense, and we're still talking about it this year, where it's like, oh, they need help on defense. Yeah. Okay, so in the draft they have to, but you have this quarterback that you want to just surround with as much talent as possible. So there's like 2 sides of the coin. It's like, do you put more talent on the defense and hope you can make them at least consistently serviceable so they can get you through the playoffs, or do you just say, Trevor's our guy. Let's surround him with as much talent as possible. We can't just keep investing resource after resource in the other side of the ball. Because any investment in the offensive line is an investment in Trevor Lawrence.
Right.
End of the day. So that's kind of where I've been torn as we kind of go through this draft process. And I'm like, okay, who makes sense for the Jaguars? It's like, all right, well, the defense needs to improve in spaces. And the offense has no, like, glaring weaknesses. Like, I'm comfortable with the offense if the season needed to start right now. They have enough. They can roll the football out and play. There's some depth things that can be improved, but that's across the team, and every team has the same problems. But I see people throwing out the right tackle. Moving Walker Little into that spot is what the Jaguars are doing. This is where they're at in the process, where they're saying, hey, we're not going to go out and pay other players. We're going to develop our own guys. Walker Little is the poster child for that. So right tackle, to me, is off the board, unless a phenomenal player falls, which is possible. There are guys that are out there. Darnell Wright from Tennessee is a good player. Broderick Jones from Georgia, I don't think he'll be there either. I mean, if some kind of way Peter Skoronski's still on the board, they should run that pick in too. There are guys that make sense in that spot. Will any of them be on the board? Will they be the best player on the board? I don't know. But I don't, and I also don't think they'll go guard. But guard would be the spot where if you're looking to improve, maybe you improve that left guard spot.
And I think that's a plausible pick on day 2. I don't think O'Cyrus Torrence, he's that guard. I don't think he's that pick 24. Maybe trade down and get him, but I just don't see that position as being that first round at 24. At O'Cyrus Torrence.
It's that positional value thing.
I just don't. It's like running back, and you touched on the Jaguars' struggles in drafting. I mean, you look at the 2020 drafts again. Kayvon Chason, C.J. Henderson gone.
Laviska Shenault's gone too.
Yeah, it's 21. Okay, we've got Trevor, and you got Travis Etienne with that second first-round pick. So this would be the 3rd year. Last year was the 3rd year they had 2 picks in that first round. You got Trayvon Walker and Devin Lloyd in the first round. You keep throwing these resources at that defensive place. I mean, you'd thought 2 first-round picks in 2020 would still be making contributions for this team, would be a big part of this. I mean, C.J. Henderson was trashed his second year. Chason has been a huge bust. Yeah. And Travis Etienne and Trevor, you can't give him credit for those picks because those are picks that I thought Etienne was a luxury pick. But you need those 2022 picks to step up and emerge. Trayvon Walker, Devin Lloyd, it seems like he may be in a different position this year, maybe rushing the passer a little bit more in that position. So you've got to hit on that pick this year, for one. I mean, that goes without saying. It seems captain obvious. But, again, Jacksonville has not done that nearly enough on those high picks in that situation. You look back the last time they were in a position like this, they were drafting with their pick this late in the draft was Taven Bryan, and you thought you were maybe drafting for some depth and maybe a guy you could take some time with, and Taven Bryan was not that. So I think Jacksonville, with this number 24 pick, they've got to focus on, I don't think offensive line. I'm with you. I just don't think offensive line, unless there's a massive guy who drops and falls there. I think tight end and I think cornerback or pass rush help are the way you have to go with that position. So Michael Mayer, Dalton Kincaid. I see Brian Branch as a guy that people are mocking a lot to the Jaguars now.
Sure.
I don't necessarily agree with Brian Branch there, but
you don't like Brian Branch? You like Michael Mayer, but you don't like Brian Branch. Why? How? Okay, go. Give me your spiel on why you don't like Brian Branch.
So let's before my spiel, I'm gonna go through some of these recent mock drafts and kind of show you where people are leaning on there. I got some recent ones here. So these are from this week. USA Today, Brian Branch, safety there. Ryan Wilson, CBS Sports. Darnell Wright, offensive tackle. Ian Valentino, Pro Football Network. Devin Witherspoon from Illinois. CBS Sports, Kyle Stackpole. Drew Sanders, linebacker, Arkansas. CBS Sports, Emmanuel Forbes, corner, Mississippi State. Josh Edwards, CBS Sports, Cam Smith, South Carolina. We're getting to the late March drafts. Another 24/7 site here, Blake Brockemeyer, Deontay Banks, Maryland. Pro Football Network, Michael Mayer. Cynthia Freeland, NFL Network Analytics, Deontay Banks. Will Brinson, CBS Sports, Brian Breesy from Clemson, Jason McIntyre, Fox Sport, Darnell Wright, another vote for him, Keith Sanchez, Darnell Wright, he's from the Draft Network, and the last one here, Joe Broback, Pro Football Network, Deontay Banks. So he's cornerback, rushing the passer, what is it? As we look into some more mock drafts.
You got more? All right.
I've got some more mock drafts, and this is a little bit of of people that's a compilation of some recent draft history and recent draft, mock draft history.
Sure.
And the bulk of them, 18.1% of 35 mock drafts, have picked Brian Branch going to the Jaguars there. But do you need, is that, you draft him as strictly as that nickel guy at number one? He's natural safety.
He's going to play safety and he's going to play nickel corner. You play nickel corner, you play your nickel defense like 60 to 70% of the time.
Okay.
He's going so I can sit here and make you a pitch for B.J. Ojulari, a pass rusher out of LSU. I could probably convince you that he's the guy. He's a leader off the field. He has NFL bloodlines. He can help the pass rush. And you'd be okay with that, right?
Yeah.
This is a guy that's going to play like 40% of your defensive snaps. As opposed to Brian Branch, who if he's your nickel corner is going to play 60 to 70% of your nickel snaps.
Okay.
Yes, I could 100% see spending a first-round pick on that guy, and then in a year from now, maybe you move on from Rayshon Jenkins, maybe you don't, but if you do, then Branch becomes your full-time safety, but he still ends up playing the nickel corner spot 70% of the time he's on the field. And he's a guy who doesn't miss tackles. He's a solid coverage player. You're not having to worry about going big nickel, little nickel. He gives you flexibility from what you can do because he can tackle, he can cover, you're good to go.
Okay.
So you're just in a three safety look the majority of the time rather than having three corners. That's it.
So again, Brian Branch, I would not pick him there. I see the argument for that.
Well, why don't you like Brian Branch?
It's not that I don't like him. I don't mind.
Here's my hook.
I don't mind Brian Branch.
And here's my hook. One thing that it should tell you. You like Nick Saban?
Yeah, of course.
What's Nick Saban's specialty of coaching?
He's a defensive guy.
He's a defensive guy. There are not many players that Nick Saban trusts to play the amount of snaps and positions that he trusted Brian Branch to play. I trust Nick Saban.
Okay, so you're an advocate for Brian Branch.
I am a huge advocate for Brian.
I'm gonna take you through a couple of these other scenarios. So Brian Branch was at 17% of these mock drafts going to the Jaguars.
I'm through the roof. Run the pick in. Let's go.
Okay, so Jamal is up for it. So Brian Branch at 17% of these mock drafts, he is in there. Okay. Number 2 pick, the number 2 guy going to the Jags in the mock draft.
Yep.
Offensive tackle. Anton Harrison.
Right.
Again, he's been mocked to the Jags quite a bit. And right after
I
Anton,
like him as a player, but I just don't like the position.
Again, and I agree. Number 3, very close to Anton Harrison, Darnell Wright, Tennessee.
Like him as a player, don't like the position.
And the number 4 guy on that list is Cam Smith, cornerback from South Carolina. I don't mind that pick either. Again, I don't.
How do you not like Brian Branch, but you like Cam Smith?
I don't mind that. I think, again, eventually it makes sense to draft and develop and maybe move on from Rayshon Jenkins. But I like a guy like a Cam Smith. I think we've done mocks before and had him. But I think tight end, cornerback, defensive line help?
Yeah, I do think that there has to be at least a conversation about defensive line. And the fact that the majority of these mocks, and I understand that when you're in the 20s, they're kind of things, you get in the weeds. Nobody knows exactly how the first 15 picks are going to go, let alone every pick before the Jaguars. So it's going to depend on who's available at that time. Trent Baalke has a history of picking edge players. Go and take a look. The dude, this is what he does. He drafts edge players in the first round. Why? Why does he draft edge players? Because they're expensive in free agency and the Jaguars can't afford them. Like Josh Allen, who has not been necessarily the most productive player, if the Jaguars are going to re-sign him, he is going to get a deal close to $100 million.
Look at, Jawan Taylor, perfect example. Again, above average tackle. He was good for Jacksonville, but he's not a guy who you would deem elite, and he was one of the highest paid right tackles in free agency
And
this
that's
year.
what we talk about when we start talking about positional value. Like Brandon Sheriff looks like a discount next to Jawan Taylor, and Brandon Sheriff has all pros next to his name. So that's the thing. When you start talking about young pass rushers, they don't become free agents. A guy like Trey Hendrickson hit the free agent market, wasn't very accomplished. Cincinnati had to pay through the roof to get him. It's worked out for the Bengals.
Yep.
So you have to invest there. So Trent Baalke picks edge players because you can't get them otherwise. You either hit on it or you don't get them. Or you can get them old, because there's a few like old and somewhat accomplished guys that are still free agents. You might be able to do that. But
I'm trying to think of the last edge rusher that Jacksonville got that was a good guy in that first round. I mean, they've not
a good player in the first round.
A good edge rusher. I mean, Tony Brackens, and we're going way back. I mean, it has been a long time since Jacksonville has plucked a dominant edge rusher in the first round. I mean, they traded up years ago to get the guy from Florida who was an absolute bust, Carlos Dunlap. Was that Carlos Dunlap? It was not Carlos Dunlap.
No.
It was not.
Derek Harvey is who
I'm thinking about. Derek Harvey is who I'm thinking about. No. So was it Carlos Dunlap?
Dunlap
has actually been good, but
I mean, they got Derek Harvey. You can go Dante Fowler. That didn't work either. Well, Fowler's had success elsewhere.
But his shining moment in Jacksonville was a training camp fight, and he threw a bag of an old a man into a retention pond. He did not do well. Yannick Ngakoue, okay.
That's the last
value. That's a value pick.
That's a value pick. And it just worked out. So there's definitely a need there. And that's why there's always been a need there of finding pass rushers. And you can't find them on free agents without overpaying for guys.
Yep.
So, and with the question around Josh Allen of if he doesn't have a productive season this year, do you pay him because someone will?
Yep.
What do you do? So there's the possibility of picking an edge rusher. Plus, you add in the conversation that we've had, that the coaching staff and the team is having of where do you play Trayvon? Do you slide him more interior on passing downs? Do you continue to let him try and be that edge player? If the vision is to play him more inside the way, or hand in the dirt, a little bit more inside as an interior player, maybe even let him be a defensive tackle, rush defensive tackle on third downs. If that's the vision, then you need another defensive end who can rush. You need another edge guy. So a first-round pick there. The fact that no one is talking about it tells you that the Jaguars are probably leaning towards it, because they're going to look at it. Like, you got to look at Trent Baalke's track record. This is what the dude does. This is just what he does. He won't draft a wide receiver. He does not do that, not in first rounds, and for good reason. He was burned once. But
by a Parker graduate,
by a Parker grad,
when he was in San Francisco.
He was burned. It was bad. But he does draft edge players. So, guys like B.J. Ojolari. I mean, Kalijah Cansey should be in the conversation. I like him as a player. Is he on the board? I don't know. I mean, if Miles Murphy, before he worked out, I thought he might slide. He worked out the other day at Clemson's or at his pro day, and he basically copied and pasted Trayvon Walker's numbers. If somehow that dude's on the board, I guarantee you Trent Baalke's drafting him. He's going to be like, yeah, we'll figure it out. We don't know where he's going to play, but we'll teach him football. Brian Brzee, he's a guy who has all of the features that Trent Baalke loves in a defensive lineman. He would make a ton of sense because the Jaguars do need depth. They need impact at that defensive line group because they have a lot of guys.
Right.
And you can project that. Like, Roy Robertson Harris is a really good player. Is he a 6-sack player?
Right. No.
He's like a 3-4 sack a year kind of guy. But that's what his career says he is. That's not saying I don't like Roy. I like Roy. Nice guy, good player on the field, but he has never put up prolific sack numbers.
You know, the DeJuan Smoot case is interesting to me. He's still unsigned.
I think you bring him back. He's
I think you've got to bring DeJuan
on the
back.
puppy list.
Again,
but again, he's a 6 sack kind of guy.
Right.
I mean, he's going to get you 6.
He is dependable. He has been very dependable. I like DeJuan. I hate that he got injured because that really torpedoed an expensive payday for DeJuan in free agency. Jacksonville would have not been able to afford him. Had he been healthy throughout that playoff run and everything, he would have been an Arden Key kind of guy. He would have gotten paid. Somebody would have paid Arden Key. Again, pass rusher, young, very dependable. He's been very consistent in Jacksonville. But yeah, Jacksonville needs some kind of help. Unless they get that out of Devin Lloyd this year, unless they get some kind of production from a guy from last year. And Jordan Smith, I mean, he's still around too.
Jordan Smith is a guy that makes sense. Again, we start talking about this draft and develop. He's a Trent Baalke draft pick.
Yep.
He's been here. The ceiling was always high on him, but the floor was kind of low. I mean, I remember seeing Jordan Smith when he came in at training camp. I was like, dude, looks like a safety. I mean, he's like 6'6", but he's like, well, he was wire thin. He's put on some weight since then, so we'll see. Last year he tore the ACL so early on, we really never got to see enough of him to figure out where he was at in the process. So maybe he's a guy who can come in and contribute. Because the Jags do like what they have from him. Now, as we kind of talk about the draft, they could add that edge player a little later on. One of the guys that's taken a draft visit with the team, Byron Young, an edge player from Tennessee. Really cool story about how he got to the University of Tennessee. If you don't know it, you should check it out. Dude was like working at like a Family Dollar after because he didn't get the offers he wanted. Decided he was going to go try out for like the Georgia military college football team. Did that, worked out. Lands at the University of Tennessee, and he's the kind of character guy that Trent Baalke and Doug Peterson want because he loves football, and they want those guys that are passionate about the game, and that's who they're going to look to bring in.
If I could give you right now, position-wise, your first 3 picks in the draft, what positions are you targeting with that first-round pick, your second-round pick, and your third?
I'd go tight end in the third. I'd go corner in the second. I'd go D-line in the first.
Okay. I would mix that up a little bit. I may go tight end in the first, or defensive line in the first, or I would flip those two. I would go, tight end first round, defensive line second round, or flip them, defensive line first round, tight end second round,
right.
and then secondary help in that third round.
And let me tell you why I picked the order I picked in. Tight end, because I think this draft is extremely deep at tight end. There are players there that make sense later on. I like Sam Laporta. I don't think he goes definitely not before the second round. Probably available in the third round. He's a guy who would make sense. Iowa tight end. He's caught a ton of passes. A little bit shorter, stockier kind of guy, but he can block, catch passes, run a bunch of routes. He could be a steal. I said corner in the second because this is a good corner class. And I think I don't think the gap between what you get at 24 and what they'll get in that second round pick is wide enough that I would put off taking edge, because the gap between the edge player you can get there at 24 and the edge player they'd get in the second round is relatively wide, because a lot of those guys will be picked over. You're going to be picking from the rest. So that's why I did the order I did, is because I see there's value. And
I don't see, either of us taking an offensive tackle on those first 3-round picks. Even, the mocks are heavy slanted towards that, but I just don't see that value right there with Walker Little and Cam Robinson there. You've got to address it in the draft, but I don't think you're talking a massive value pick on a tackle early on.
You should always use your middle rounds to make sure you have offensive line depth and defensive line depth every year, so that way you have developing players on your roster. The only way I would take, and this is just me.
All right.
The only way I would take an offensive lineman with that first-round pick is if Peter Skoronski starts to fall. Peter Skoronski is good. He is going to be a blue-chip guard and probably a very good tackle, either position he wants to play. If some reason teams get spooked because he does have shorter arms and he just starts his stock torpedoes and falls, I'd run the pick in, and they can play him at guard. They can play him at right tackle. He could play left tackle if Cam got hurt. He is a versatile player. He's a smart player. I think he's going to be a very good pick, a very good NFL player. But the reason I say that is because he's considered pretty universally one of the top offensive linemen on the board. So if he was on the board, you just run the pick in and say, all right, come on, Peter.
It's kind of like when the Jalen Carter situation was unfolding.
Yeah.
He had fallen in quite a few mock drafts, and you and I talked a few episodes ago about if Jalen Carter gets to that 17 to 20 range, do you entertain a thought of trading up? And that seems to have stabilized a little bit. His agent, Joe Rosenhaus, has said that they're not taking any visits with teams outside the top 10. So there must be a vibe that Jalen has stabilized a little bit. Now he's got his court situations and stuff straightened out. But again, another player like that, if they start to fall, they always do in the draft. There's always a guy or two who falls. And again, you always got the Raiders making some odd pick, Cleveland Farrell or something like that, and nobody has him even projected to go, like a Tyson Alualu for the Jaguars fans, where he was picked 10th overall and you had no idea where he even played at or who he was. So you always got those situations. I don't think it's going to be Jalen Carter, even though it appeared at some point it could, and I don't know if Peter Skoronski's going to fall that far.
No, I don't think he will. I mean, if he did, like I said, I'd run the pick in and just don't look back at it. But that's the only way I'd go offensive line. I mean, there's some other athletes that are in the conversation, but fringe conversation that makes sense. But if it was me and I'm looking at offensive line in that first round, the only way I'd do it is if it's a guy that I'm like, he's going to roll in and he could be a Pro Bowler as a rookie.
I mean,
it's the only way, because I have to see it as an upgrade and to move past one of my guys. If the goal is to draft and develop, which is every NFL team's goal, Walker Little has shown in his limited playing time, he's been invested in the locker room, a good guy, locker room citizen. I mean, at some point you got to give this dude a shot, or you're just going to let him walk.
Second round pick too. People don't realize he was a second round pick.
It's not like he wasn't a high investment. So at some point, the dude's got to play. Yeah. And then that left guard spot, like Ben Barch and Tyler Shatley weren't bad. Could you upgrade there? Sure. Yeah. You could. But can you considerably, they drafted Luke Fortner, third round last year?
Yeah, and
started every game.
Yeah, great.
So you want me to say I'm going to pick a guard in the first round, and I picked the center last year in the third round?
Yeah, and Fortner, I mean, you can make an argument that he was the most consistent rookie last year. Started every game, and Trevor loved him. And again, third-round guy, you get that often, not a premium position, that center position, and he did extremely well. So I think you look at offensive line depth, unless you talk about one of those guys falling, those blue chip kind of guys, the Broderick Jones, the Peter Skoronski kind of guys falling to them. Again, there's always a guy that falls in the draft, and that may be a conversation you have on draft night if you see one of those guys slip. But I'm thinking, again, tight end, defensive line, pass rush help some kind of way, and then cornerback in that kind of order.
All right. Hey, that's fair. We look at things differently, but that's why we have these conversations, is to kind of get a different perspectives on how the thing could unfold. We still have a little bit less than a month till the draft. We're trying to catch up with a few of the different local guys that have a chance to get picked. Maybe we'll bring you some of their stories here on the podcast in the future as we kind of gear down and get ready for the draft. Who knows? Maybe the Jaguars can keep some of these guys at home, play in front of the home crowd. They already got Shaq Quarterman, and they brought back Darius Williams. It never hurts when you got a hometown guy.
Yeah, wouldn't be. I mean, to me, Will Mallory in round 4 or 5.
Oh, you don't want him in the first round?
Not in the first round, but again, Will Mallory, he's a sleeper pick. I saw him play. He was on our News4Jags All-25 team. Is one of the best tight ends in the last 25 years. Yeah. The guy had a sleeper kind of career at Miami, one of the top receiving tight ends in program history there. So, again, a sleeper pick in round 4 or 5. Maybe a lot of the local guy comes here.
Hey, I like it. I'd like Will Mallory. We'll see. Maybe we'll find a way to catch up with Will before the draft. But that'll do it for this News4Jags podcast, and we'll catch up with you next time.